All right, we are at the end of the year, and it is December. It's towards the end of December now, and that means we've got 20 more albums to talk about. The best of December, and I gotta admit, there weren't enough records this month to really provide like a solid 20 recommendations. There are a couple on here that are sort of tacked on just to fill up the list, and it doesn't really venture too far out into other genres here because I'm very much focused on getting a ton of other things done, and I haven't been listening to new releases beyond the last. That were released beyond the middle of the month, other than what I had months in advance. So the best of the year is pretty obvious. Sorry, the best of the month is pretty obvious for me with Verathron's latest album, The Crimson Temple. Not only do I think this is one of the better albums out this year, but I think this is one of the better records from the band since Crow's Reign. And, I have my own favorites in their discography, but this one just arrives at the right time with the right amount of energy. It's, maybe more of a heavy metal album, more of a bombastic, big production than we're used to hearing from Verathron. But the last couple records prepared us for that pretty well, and I think this is a nice change of pace, and it's good to see a band coming out with vitality, especially this band who's been around since the ancients, and there's so much force to this record and so many ideas packed into it that I couldn't help but be there along for the ride. And I just generally, this is one of my favorite bands in general. So I was glad that this lived up to that legacy, but also had something new to say and new songs that will fit on their set list pretty well for their style, which is both classic and looking forward to something a little bit new. So of course, the highest recommendation of the year, album of the month. No question on that. Foreordained is the third full-length album from Phobocosm, a Montreal, Quebec-based death metal band who are very much in the style of Immolation and Dead Congregation. I would say there's also a little bit of Ulcerate in their sound as well. They just admire that general atmospheric death metal scene, and their sound really fits in among the best of them. This was not a huge surprise because I'd liked their past work, but I think I was kind of surprised on how good this record was. It really shows up. It seems very well considered from point A to point B. Everything is so well curated. This is the highest quality release of to date from this band, and it just about took the number one spot here. And there's a couple things that it could have done to set it over the edge, but overall, this is probably one of the better death metal records out this year, and kind of a surprise here at the end of the year for a lot of people who aren't paying attention. I think it's more than just an atmospheric death metal record. It is one that is driven by riffs and aggression, and some aspects of it are familiar, but others they've developed since their beginnings. And if you're familiar with their first two records, you'll probably be pretty pleased with the way that they've ironed out a lot of the issues the first record had, the second record had, and brought in all those best aspects for this third big record. And high recommendation for me. Fusa, Norway-based thrash metal band Inculter have returned with their third full-length album, and I would say their most refined and most classic thrash-oriented one. The previous records from this band were more interested in the more primitive and aggressive sort of death and black thrash metal aspects of late 80s thrash metal, and this album fully goes for the sort of Bay Area bombast and the songwriting of late 80s thrash metal, and they pretty much nail it. This is a really big surprise from this band. I had high expectations, but the last record was in this a very different style, something that was more rooted in the underground thrash metal of the late 80s that was verging on death metal, and this is much more of a sort of a classic thrash record, and that means a lot if you're a big fan of it. It kind of looks like a death metal record when you look at it, but it certainly isn't. And I think the vocalist, guitarist has really done a great job putting out a pretty classic feeling album, and one that rated very highly with me for obvious reasons. Um, and it just kind of narrowly got beat out by one of my favorite bands and another impressive death metal record. But it's not too far behind those other two records in quality, and definitely deserves attention if you're a fan of thrash metal. Pilgrimage is the third full-length album from Australian black metal band Sylvan Awe. The duo has been at it for a while, but for this record, they just found their finesse. I think. I think they found a more serious form of songwriting and a little bit more of a progressive approach to songwriting, and riff arrangements and different vocal styles, and bringing in a kind of a world's worth of experience listening to black metal and fusing all of their favorite pieces and parts into something that is their own. I think it's kind of the key point. The last record pretty much got it right in terms of their sound, but it wasn't quite their sound yet. And this record pulls it together so it feels like Sylvan Awe have a personality of their own that's a little bit progressive, has interested in more than black metal, but it fuses a lot of those different inspirations into something that is very kind of buttoned up but still expressive, and has sort of an epic, almost a heavy metal feeling to it as well. So really surprising result, and sort of an inspired record that I kind of came out of nowhere. Oozing Radioactive Vomission is the second full-length album from Cryptworm. This is a death metal band from Bristol, England, from a fellow who emigrated from Hungary, and you'll know him because he's a big part of Rothatus, a death doom metal band that came out with a record a couple years ago that I was a huge fan of. Otherwise, their focus is much more on the Undergang and I guess Demolic and Carcass influenced stuff of right now. It's a brutal sound. It's a little bit technical. It's got a very guttural and expressive vocals. It's very over the top, but they ran it in to the point where it's still moshable and of the now, with a little bit of the hardcore influence you'd expect from, death metal of right now in these last 3 or so years, where things have gone primitive as a point of, followerdom. So this is an especially good record. The riffs are not fully there all the time, but you can tell the technical ability is. It all comes together into a great death metal album, one that I rated highly. So definitely check that out, and don't overlook it as many have already. Vexilloid is the latest full-length album from Keras. This is a Finnish black metal solo project from Atvar, who's best known for his work in Rahu and especially Circle of Ouroboros. This has been one of his longer-running projects since the 2000s, and it's always been focused on some form of atmospheric, but mainly raw black metal. And this particular record focuses on the riff, I think, more than most anything else. There is a great atmosphere to it. It is very dark. If you're a fan of the Verminous Serpent record that came out earlier this year, this has a similar feeling in that it's rooted in the first wave, the early Celtic Frost sound, but also distinctly kind of classic old school black metal in feeling. I thought this was a great record. It was impressive from the first time I heard it, and it's quickly grown on me. And I wasn't a huge fan of the most recent record prior, but this is one. As well, there's also an EP that came out with it that expands on the sound a little bit more. Together they make for one of the best experiences that December has to offer in terms of black metal. Gravehammer is a quartet out of Kiel, Germany, and one that I think started as a duo just a few years ago, and they put out a record on Caligari Records. It was just all right. It was kind of a death doom and a blackened death doom kind of thing, and now they've worked up to a full length, and it's a lot better than expected. I feel like after 2020, they sort of figured out who they were. They found the riffs and they went for it. And this record is very much old school death metal in that respect. It's got a little bit of a blackened bestial death metal side to it, but that's just part of their oeuvre. It's much more of a death metal record with some death doom metal tendencies, and it's got this really great raw and aggressive sound to it. It reminded me of Pentacle, but also something a little bit newer, sort of like Cryptic Brood or something like that. So definitely check that out if you're a fan of death metal. Merciless Storm is the latest EP from this Finland-based black and death thrash metal band, Malicious. And I would say there's a pretty straightforward recommendation here. If you like riffs and you like them one after the other in blazing, lightning fast succession, you kind of get all of that and a little bit extra on this EP, which is very short but rooted in classic death metal forms and death thrash metal. So it's a little bit bestial, a little bit chaotic, but ultimately it's readable as death metal and old school death metal. So worth checking out if you're just up for some riffs. If you are a fan of Impiety and Angel Corpse, and of course you are, this record from Infernal Execrator. I believe it's their third full-length album, a Singapore-based black death metal band. You'll appreciate that they are always delivered at blazing speed with plenty of riffs, and this is one of their more aggressive records to date by my measure. I'm not quite as familiar with their previous full-length, but it feels like they've amped everything up to the nth degree here, and I think overall it's a great presentation, sort of just a freak out kind of record, and not one where I really followed note for note every bit of it the first time I ripped through it, but overall I did feel like there was enough substance there to give this a high rating, and I do enjoy this style quite a bit. So see if this is your kind of thing. Of Momentous Endless Night is the third full-length album from Ringare, and this is a project that began as a solo, one of many solo acts from Alex Poole that turned into Chaos Moon later on, and eventually he reprised the band in I think 2017 or so, and he's added other members since from Sweden and elsewhere. And basically, it's a symphonic black metal group that has an atmospheric lean to it. And I would say that this is probably their best record to date. There's 3 or 4 just very long and involved pieces on this record, and all of them are really class, the way they develop each song. There's a very strong melodic component to it. The keyboards are a very strong aspect, and the drums. The drums they're kind of brutal in the way that they approach things, but it's still an atmospheric black metal record. So there's a really fine touch to this thing overall. I probably should have rated it higher, but that'll be something to listen to more in the early months of next year. So definitely check this one out and see if it's your thing. So, of course, another symphonic black metal record, but not just another one. This is the Nighthold third full-length album from Vargrave, a Finnish black metal band that started as a solo project from V Chaos and now has expanded to include members of Moon Sorrow and Satanic Warmaster, who they bring their own style here, but they definitely bring more personality into the recording, and you can tell the keyboards are a huge focus on this record, and they're done a little bit more different than the usual kind of minimalist sort of tuneful prancing that you'd expect. A lot of people will accuse this band of being an Emperor clone, but I think once you sit down and actually listen to those layers of synth and keyboard and the way they interact with the style of melodicism here, you'll find that this is something a little bit special, maybe a little bit more Finnish in its register and style, and definitely something that's worth checking out for its different approach. It is an hour-long record, and maybe that's a lot for some people, but for me, this is a very strong showing that is not as directly pandering to that classic Norwegian style as the first two records kind of were. I think they're moving away from that into their kind of their own thing, and for me that was a lot more entertaining. Inside Zurs Diabel Sklokken Zerklang, or however you would pronounce the title of this record. This is the second full-length album from Hinsides, a solo project from a fellow who is a key member as vocalist and bassist of Ultra Sylvam. The quality of this record is reflective of the increasing quality you'll find on the latest Ultra Sylvam record, where they went from a more raw and roughshod debut into something that is much more musical, much more finessed, and full of personality. I think that's the interesting thing about this record, is that it comes in a very classic, like black metal inspiration, but there's a big personality behind it that is expressed within these songs, and some of it feels a little bit rushed, vibrant, but also a little bit throwaway. And not to say that any piece of it is underthought, but more that this is raw black metal, and it is meant to be emergent and aggressive in that sense. Midnight Spawn Ved Dievelens Port is the second full-length album from Geistazika. This is a Danish black metal project that is focused on pagan black metal, and I would say in a more classic style, which is fairly raw, but mostly tuneful. And it concerns itself with longer form songs, and generally, I think this was generally just a big improvement over the last record, and that's maybe the main thing to say about it. Bestial Extermination is the latest full-length album from Blood Serpent, a Hanoi, Vietnam-based war metal band, or black death metal band, with a pretty solid rhythm section, and one that takes more inspiration from Black Witchery and Blasphemy and Angel Corpse and kind of the earlier black death metal fusion that was a little bit more raw, but still had some punkish and thrash metal influenced sides to its attack. So a pretty involved record, and one that was surprisingly good and not just the standard fare. Black Star Gnosis is the latest full-length album from Demon Sea, a band that is sort of kind of a urban myth, a legend among United States black metal and its formations, with a couple of legendary moments in the past involving Profanatica, but basically a great set of demos and LPs in their past, which were released to the public out of order, and their discography is confusing, no doubt, but all of it is pretty classic, and definitely this is an old school approach to black metal, which is very riff driven, very rhythm driven, and song oriented. And so this will feel like a kind of a blitzkrieg, an attack, and one that focuses on the riff and the rhythm. And I think that is sort of the hex that comes with the Demon Sea album. I think this is more geared towards their best known sound, and That really is the strength of the band. There are a lot of dark ambient sections on this album, which will be off-putting for some people, but that is within their typical oeuvre. So definitely check this one out if you're even curious about this band, and check out some of their older releases to get context, because it really helps to understand where this record is coming from.